and welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Sophie, and today we're going to talk about how we can help our ESOL or EAL learners with their spelling. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about today is we're going to have a look at what's so tricky about English spelling. And spoiler alert, there are quite a few things. Then we're going to have a look at the connection between reading and spelling. We'll have a look at what strategies good spellers use and how we can encourage our own students who struggle with spelling to also use these strategies. Then we'll have a look at why is it a big deal? Why is it that students need to have good spelling? And we'll have a look at how poor spelling can impact on the rest of the language learning experience for students. Then we'll have a look at how English spelling works in English. And again, that's quite interesting. We'll discuss whether we think it's mostly regular or irregular and why. After that, we'll have a look at very practical strategies, practical classroom activities that we can use to help our students improve their spelling. And we'll have a look at a wide range of strategies ranging from visual to kinesthetic, etc. And after that, we'll have a quick chat about if we can use technology to help our students with their spelling. Okay, so to get started, right, we all know that English spelling can be a bit tricky. And if you look at the picture there, the spelling it's difficult. No, it doesn't look right. It's challenging. No, it doesn't look right. Okay, it's hard. Yes, it is hard. And why? Well, again, we'll have a look at a range of different ideas here. And if we look at the top circle there in orange, silent letters can be quite difficult. Why can't we say, my hand is feeling numb? Why can't I say, my friend is a psychologist? Why can't we say, give me a minute or listen to me? So silent letters, again, they'll be quite intuitive for some learners, but they may not be intuitive for all our learners. The next one down is weak vowels. And I think this is really interesting because it shows that spelling is not just connected to the written word, it's also connected to listening. If our students cannot really hear the difference between cat, cot, and cut, it's very unlikely they're going to be able to write these words accurately as well. So here we really have the connection between the sound and the spelling. Vowels tend to be more difficult a lot of the time than consonants, and especially those little pairs of vowels. So meet, people. When do I use double E? When do I use EA? When do I use EO? When do I use EI or IE, etc. Double letters, if we look at that light blue circle there at the bottom, can also be quite difficult. Students might just go, so accommodation, is it one C double M, double C one M, double C double M? So again, double letters can be quite difficult. They exist in a lot of different languages, but not across the board. Tricky letter strings, and I think the most famous one in English is probably the OUGH letter string, because again, the sound doesn't look like the letters, but also OUGH can have different sounds. So for example, an enough, it's an off sound. But if I talk about the bough of a tree, then it's OUGH, but the sound, again, is different. Next one, apostrophes can be quite difficult. And I would imagine that this is something that's true not just for English language learners. I think it's also really tricky for native speakers. And maybe in a way, native speakers maybe make those mistakes more than our own English language learners, because I think they learn when to use apostrophes in context. So again, I hope we can have a chat about this later. And the same thing goes for a homophone. So there, and there. They will sound the same, but their spelling is different. And again, that's something that a lot of native speakers find difficult. So if native speakers find this difficult, can we expect that our English language learners will also find this difficult? So again, I hope we can have a chat about this during our Q&A session afterwards. Now, let's have a look at the connection between reading and spelling. The reason why I wanted to talk about this today is that we often think, well, if somebody is good at reading, their spelling is going to be good. So we assume that good reading means good spelling, like ding, magic. But does it always work that way though? Well, here's a little test. I'm going to show you a quick text, and I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with it already. And if you are, you can still read the text. If you've never seen this text before, just go through it. And I would just like to ask you a very basic just question. What is this text about? So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to read the text. Are you ready? Let's go. What is this text about? 15 seconds left. 5, 2, 1, time's up. So again, feel free to use the chat and feel free to tell us, did you think that you were able to read this text? What is it about? And most importantly, what does this text tell us about the connection between reading and spelling? I would imagine that most of you will have been able to read this text and understand it, right? However, well, I think we'll all agree that the spelling is all over the place. So what does that tell us about the connection between reading and spelling? I can read this text, although the spelling is completely inaccurate. So let's have a look. How does it work? So let's have a look first at reading. Reading is about decoding a message. A lot of the time, it's about receiving information. So I mean that we're a little bit more passive. To get better at reading, we work on comprehension and we use context, right? When we read, we don't read letter by letter, right? And as the text earlier showed, as long as the first and the last letter are correct, we're most likely to be able to read the word. Okay. We also use our own visual memory. We remember the overall shape of a word. It's like our brain has taken click, a little picture of the word. Unless when it comes to sight words or high frequency words, we don't even really need to read them. We just look at the shape and we'll know right away what that word is. Okay. But spelling, in contrast, is a bit different. Spelling is more like encoding. Spelling is an active process. It involves a cognitive process. Context may not help us. I mean, even if I've done a lot of context work around the idea of, going away on a holiday and places where you can stay, where you go away on holiday, having that context fresh in my mind may not help me spell the word accommodation accurately. When we spell letter by letter. That's how we begin anyway. After that, we can move on to letter chunks, again, the ing or the ough. And when we spell, and it's something that we do automatically, but still we all use a range of different strategies, whether they are visual or auditory, kinesthetic, and cognitive. You may find that some of these strategies might work better for you than some others. However, we still use some of all those different types of strategies. So whenever it comes to spelling and a lot of ELT, David Crystal's got a good way with words. And again, I'm going to show you a quote. And I think he's been able to really encapsulate why the connection between reading and spelling is not as straightforward as we think. So again, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to go through this quote, and then feel free to use the chat and just tell us whether you agree or disagree with David's quote. There we go. Let's go. Halfway. 3, 2, 1. So again, feel free to let us know whether you agree or disagree with David Crystal's quote. I really like that last sentence. The task facing a speller is always greater than that facing a reader. And again, feel free to let us know whether you agree or disagree. I think when it comes to spelling, a lot of the time we take it for granted because it's something that maybe we haven't really had to struggle with very much. So we kind of assume that most of our students are going to have no significant issue with it. And it could be the case. Maybe most of our students are not going to have any issues with spelling, but the ones that do need us to be able to help them. Because if it's not our job to help them, well, whose job is it? Right. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at what it is that good spellers do. And all of you out here today, I'm sure, are amazing spellers. And you might not even realize all the amazing strategies that it is that you use on a daily basis when it comes to spelling. So let's have a look. Well, yes, we did talk about the connection between reading and spelling. And we said, one, good reading doesn't always mean good spelling. However, we've noticed that good spellers often enjoy reading. So it's not just that they're particularly good at it, but it's something that they really enjoy. They've got a kind of curiosity for the written word. So again, we find that good spellers often read maybe more extensively than students who struggle with spelling and maybe also feel a bit discouraged by it. Oh, spelling is hard. It's making reading more difficult. I'm just not going to do it as much. Also, we find that good spellers are usually very good at breaking words down into chunks and into syllables, right? And it's something that people might say, like, fantastic. In my class, I find that my students always struggle spelling days of the week, especially Wednesday, right? That silent D just keeps throwing them. And the other day, one of my students said, "But teacher, I think I've got it. I remember how to spell Wednesday because in my head, I think wed, nez, de." I thought that's exactly it. She had broken it down into those 3 different syllables. She knows that this is not how we pronounce the full word. We don't say Wednesday, but it's how she's learned to remember the spelling of the word. So I thought, brilliant. A lot of the time, we find that good spellers are people who've got fairly good pronunciation. So in the sense that good pronunciation and good listening go together. Good listening often also means good spelling. So I mean that people are quite able to recognize the different sounds that they hear. And that's particularly important when it comes to vowel sound, like we said earlier on, the cat, cot, and cut. So again, if your students are able to rehear those different sounds, chances are they'll be better able to spell them correctly. We also find that good spellers are good at noticing patterns of spelling. So they might just be able to kind of get that list in their little drawer in their head. Oh, these are the OUGH words, right? They're going to be able to kind of compile a list of those OUGH words. And when it comes to strategies later on, we'll have a look at how it's really valuable for students to start to come up with their own lists of words, of spellings, whether they're to do with letter strings or letter patterns, and also to do with topics. We find that good spellers usually have a solid grasp of word formation. So they're usually able to break down a word, think, okay, this is the prefix, this is the root of the word, and this is the suffix. So again, a lot of the time, good spellers are good at noticing the affixes in a word. Okay, this is maybe something that you do. Again, feel free to put that down in the chat. For me, that's my strategy. If I'm not sure about the spelling of a word, I have to write it different times, and then I'll be able to somehow work out which one looks correct, right? So considerably, I just wrote it there, and the first was like, no, I don't think it's right. Wrote it again with the letter. He was like, that's the one. And what does that tell us about spelling? Again, it tells us that this is to do with our visual memory. So somehow my brain remembers the shape of the word. It remembers what the word looks like. And that's why it's really valuable to get students to look at words quite carefully. To count how many letters, to look at where are the vowels, what kind of vowels are there any silent letters, any double letters, because their brain will remember what the word looks like. We'll also find that good spellers are usually quite good at associating a word with a little visual picture of the meaning. So for example, if you look at there, the first one with the little man is about the possessive. So they've remembered, okay, so there, T-H-E-I-R, that's with the possession. So I'll put a picture of a little man in it. But there, T-H-E-R-E, it's more for a place, for a direction. So they've put that little signpost. And we also find that for those last two pictures, good spellers often are people who are quite good at checking their work and asking themselves the right question. So asking themselves, okay, did I spell my adverbs correctly? Did I check my prepositions? Did I check my double letters? And also good spellers are often people who are quite good at spotting their own errors. And that's why then we'll have a look at the value of error correction when it comes to helping students improve their spelling. There's a lot of error correction that's really about the students noticing where they went wrong to then be able to identify how they can improve their own spelling. That little picture there at the bottom always makes me laugh. Always check for spelling errors, and always check for spelling error signs. Definitely. So let's have a chat now. Does it really matter? I mean, you may say, look, maybe our spelling is certainly not 100% accurate 100% of the time. We all make spelling mistakes, especially I find that when we write on the board, because writing on the board it's not the same as writing on a piece of paper. Sometimes we'll be writing on the board, and as we monitor around the room, we might just look at the board in the distance and go, oh my God, look at that, I forgot the double M, right? So, nobody is exempt from poor spelling. We all make spelling mistakes at times, right? It happens. Sometimes we're tired or whatever. And does it really matter? Well, yes, is the quick answer. It matters because we find that poor spelling can also hinder the other writing skills. So it may have an impact on the overall written fluency of our students' work. A lot of the time, it will limit the lexical range that our students use. And if you remember that little picture I showed you at the start, it's spelling is difficult, cross out. It's challenging, cross out. It's hard. So again, instead of using maybe, higher level words, a lot of students will go for the easier words because they're just easier to spell. So maybe more basic words that are easier to spell. And that's going to have a detrimental effect on their lexical range. And this could have a knock-on effect on exam results as well, for example, because range of language is a significant factor in IELTS or Cambridge exams. And I think this is maybe the most important one. Poor spelling is connected to low confidence, to a lack of self-confidence. And this often has a knock-on effect in the overall language learning experience of our students. And this is why a lot of students who've got poor spelling might be a bit reluctant to start reading. They feel like, it's just too hard. Spelling is hard, reading is hard. I'm just not going to do any of it. So it can have quite a significant impact on language learning. Now, here comes the $1 million question. Is English spelling regular or irregular? So I would like to have your ideas here in the chat now. So let's go for 5 seconds and tell us, what do you think? Do you vote for regular? So yeah, it's regular, no problem. Or irregular. Who can make sense of this? So let's see. What do you think? Well, interesting. Now, unfortunately, we may not have a kind of foolproof answer, right? And the question might not be as to whether English spelling is regular or irregular, right? The question is more about how it works. So I cannot say that English spelling is regular, but likewise, I also can't really say that it's completely irregular. But one thing I can say for sure is that it's complex, right? It's just really complex. Why is it complex? Because it's polysystemic. English spelling is based on 5 main writing systems. So let's have a quick look at all of them. And we're going to start at the top there in orange. Let's have a look at the phonological system. Some words are phonetic in English. So cat is cat. And this is why a lot of kids, when they learn to read, still use phonics. They look at their sit, pin. They look at the most common sound. They look at words that are spelled phonetically. So again, it's great when it works, but as we know, Most words in English, however, are not based on the phonological system. The next one there in gray is the graphemic system. And these are basic rules of writing that we use. For example, we know that in English, each word must have at least one vowel sound. And probably also each syllable is going to have minimum one vowel sound. Okay. We also have some graphemic rules, but I think they're riddled with exceptions. So like the, I before E, etc., that might resonate with you. Say, oh yeah, that never really worked for me. Or so again, we do have graphemic rules. Some of them I think are probably more reliable than others. I tend not to go into the I after E, because that's not how I learned it myself, but also because I think there are so many exceptions that it kind of defeats the purpose maybe a little bit. Again, feel free to write in the chat whether it's something that you agree with or disagree with. However, I would definitely use that basic rule for all students. You can't have a word in English without a vowel sound. You can't have a syllable in English without a vowel sound. And I find that, especially if your students have come from a different alphabet, come from a different script, that's not a universal rule. There are words, I think, in different languages without vowel sounds, right? Or you may have let's say, a 3-syllable word with one vowel sound. Okay. So again, students may not be able to replicate that pattern into English. And I think that's one rule that's quite useful for students to be made aware of. The next system there in yellow is the morphological system. And this is why word formation not only boosts our students' vocabulary, but also it can really, really help consolidate their accuracy when it comes to spelling. So I was looking at prefixes and suffixes, because these, a lot of the time, are spelled fairly accurately, and quite systematically. That can be really useful for students to notice that. The next system there in blue, I think, is really interesting. It's the etymological system. Now, you may find, you might say, look, my students are beginners, or maybe, they're pre-intermediate at most. I'm not going to bombard them with, look, if a word comes from Greek, the k sound is likely to be spelled with CH. Or, if a word comes from French, EAU, that little string often has a U sound. However, in my experience, I find that it's something I don't dwell on, but I mention it quite quickly. So, for example, I will say to my students, remember scientific words, all of them come from Greek. So you might find that, you go to the chemist, it's CH, but it's a k sound, that word comes from Greek. So again, it's just for students to then be able to start notice those different spelling patterns whenever they're reading. And the last system that the complex English spelling is based on is the lexical system. So again, there are homophones, yes, and again, that's what I would love to hear your views on this. In my experience, I find that native speakers might actually struggle with homophones more than English language learners, because we teach our students in context, and that's why our students usually don't really have that many difficulties, I think, with the lexical system, because they know that there is they are, just contraction. They know that there is a possessive. It's not our, it's not your, it's there. And they know that there is for direction, here and there. So again, it's something we can chat about later. Now let's have a look at the strategies that we can use. So first we'll have a look at the different types of visual strategies, and then I'm going to show you different examples. Visual strategies are probably the one that we resort to the most instinctively in the classroom. So let's have a look at them. And they're really, really useful. I really like that one there in orange at the top, the idea of finding words within other words. One thing I would say about this, though, is whenever we encourage students to find words within other words, I encourage them not to jumble the letters. I think that's adding an extra level of difficulty. And, using Scrabble to make up words, for me, it's like a different exercise altogether. So we'll have a little practice finding words within other words in a minute. The next one is looking at the word shape. And this is particularly useful if you've got students who confuse letters, who maybe confuse sounds also. So for example, I teach quite a lot of Arabic speakers, and the B and the P can be a bit difficult, because I think, it's the same sound pretty much in Arabic, I think. So again, it might be useful for students to look at a word to remember, does it go up? Is it B? Is it B? Or does it go down? Is it P? Is it P? The next one there in yellow is the idea of finding patterns. Now, I think it's something we'll talk about when it comes to sharing best practice. I've heard many times in classrooms during lesson observations, teachers who, really out of empathy will say to their students, oh, don't worry about your spelling. English spelling is so irregular. I mean, I found it really difficult myself. So don't worry about it too much. And while I think it stems from a really good place and it shows a lot of empathy for the students, I also think that it turns spelling into this massive thing where students is left thinking, do you know, I don't really stand a chance. I mean, it's even my teacher finds it difficult. If it's hard for my teacher, I'm never going to be able to get this. It's just too hard. So instead of focusing on what's irregular, I think let's encourage our students to notice what is regular, and let's encourage our students to find patterns. So again, I'll show you a couple of examples afterwards. Next, coloring is really useful. It's something that we find a lot of teachers use when it comes to helping students with dyslexia as well, using colors to whether, color the short vowels, color the pairs of vowels, coloring double letters in a word. But colors tend to help students remember the correct spelling of a word. Next one, counting the number of letters in a word. So if you've got students who are still struggling with accommodation, that was definitely mine. Again, say, okay, try to remember how many letters are in this word. And then I'll show you a little chart that we can use where students can record that kind of information. The last one is just really leaving it open to the students and say, look, whenever you find hard spots in a word, whether for you it's consonant, whether for you it's double letters or vowel, highlight the parts of the word that either you got wrong or that you think you're very likely to get wrong. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. And the first example I'm going to show you is the word something. So SOMETHING. And take a minute now and try to think, how many words can you find inside the word something? So again, feel free to put them in the chat. For example, so is a word we can see in something. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds, as many as possible. But again, in the same order as the word. So let's see what we've got. Actually, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words inside the word something. It's engaging for students because it's a bit like becoming kind of a word detective or a letter detective, but also it helps consolidate the spelling of that one word. Word shapes. So again, here you can see the words I had picked were particularly useful for my Arabic speakers. Those word shape worksheets are really handy. You can find loads of websites where you can make your own, and they're free and you don't need to sign up. But I found that they're particularly useful. One thing I like to do once the students have completed their worksheet, then we use the questionnaire rounds and I get the students to actually make their own, and then they get to test each other. So again, it's quite fun. It becomes more kinesthetic then. So we're going for visual and kinesthetic strategies together. Nobody said we couldn't mix up our strategies. Right. The next picture, you might go, what is this about? But again, it's the idea of showing patterns. Now, up until I started really thinking about how I could help my students with spelling, I never even really noticed this myself. But all the words connect to the concept of one have the letters O-N-E, or at least O-N in them. So one, obviously, alone, only, lonely, once. So again, we do see, and the last one is none, so as in not one. Now, true enough, the sounds are different, right? But the letters are still there. So it's really useful for students to notice and go, okay, so when it's connected to the concept of one, usually I'm going to find those letters. And here's a question for you now. Does this apply to the concept of two? So TWO. Two babies born at the same time? Twins. TW. I don't go to the gym once a week. I go twice weeks again. TW. What else? Between two things. TW. 12 TW, 20 TW. So again, noticing those patterns can be really, really useful for students to try to improve their spelling. Like we said, highlighting or overwriting the hard spots of words. And it's useful to the students decide what the hard spots are for them. So you may find that, students have no issue with enough, right? But maybe they're really struggling with psychologists or people, right? So whatever letters or strings of letters they find difficult, just to highlight them. And the last one is the idea of coloring short vowels, because again, for example, I think, and I hope that the people here who can either confirm or, correct me, but I think that, for example, in Arabic, we don't have to write short vowels. Now, I think they've got little symbols, but they're not always used. And the idea is really from context, readers can just decode what the words are. So a lot of our students, but a lot of my students would just not write short vowels. So students, they'll write student because you don't really hear the because it's just a schwa sound. So here we're looking at daily routine. We get them to color the short vowels, and maybe for number 4 and 5, get them to do it alone or with a partner, and then check. The next one. Now, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say that it's fun, right? Because that might be pushing it a bit. But again, you might find that this is maybe how you learned your spellings whenever you were in primary school, right? And as far as I know, it's still that's how my son, who's in primary school, is still, learning his spellings. The idea of looking at the word. So look at the word, say the word, cover, write, and check. Now, in this little table here, which I've taken from Joanna Sterling's amazing spelling blog website, and there's a link for you there, she's broken down into several columns. So first, you look at the word and you copy it, but it's really to really look at all those letters. Then count how many letters. You can write the word again and draw around it, especially if there's a B and a P, potential confusion. Then you cover it, you write, and you check. If it's correct, happy days, tick. If you got it wrong, you made a mistake, go through that process again. And don't forget to revise these words, because again, being able to spell the word Wednesday accurately on a Wednesday doesn't mean you're going to remember it by Friday. So you really need to keep reviewing these words, like we do with vocabulary anyway with our own students. Next one are auditory strategies. The most common is the idea of spelling aloud. And again, it may be something that you do yourself or something that you've heard, some of your colleagues do or some of your students do. The next one is the idea of using rhythm. Now, I remember seeing an amazing teacher who was absolutely brilliant with teaching spelling, who was able to use rap. Now, that's not going to work for me because I just can't do it. And I don't think it would really help my students. But the idea of using rhythm for spelling patterns, so O-U-G-H, O-U-G-H, whatever rhythm you can find can also really help students if they can remember what the words sound like. If they can associate a little melody, a little rhythm to the spelling, it might help them remember it better. The next one there at the bottom is the idea of sounding out words. And that's particularly useful if the words again are based on the phonological system. So if you're not sure how to spell cat, act might help you, right? And also the last one is the idea of listening. So again, students need to be able to really hear the sound to be able to spell them correctly. They need to be able to hear the sounds to then reproduce those sounds in terms of pronunciation, but also to encode them in paper. So again, just listening to sounds. So that's when you might do, little discrimination tasks. Can they hear the difference in the and the So, cat, cut, mag, mug, etc. The next set of strategies are the kinesthetic ones. And again, you'll use those at your own discretion. You know best what works best for your students or not. And you might find that some of these maybe don't really work for some of our students. But often, I think it's really the idea is that using a combination of these strategies is quite useful. So I wouldn't just use visual strategies all the time. Likewise, I wouldn't use kinesthetic strategies all the time. But I find that getting students to trace the words with the finger on the desk is quite useful. Or writing the word in the air can also be quite useful. Writing a word in sound. Now you might just go, Jesus, I'm certainly not bringing a sandpit into the classroom. And that's fine. But if it helps some students, it may be something you can encourage them to do at home or if they go to the beach, for example. Now, again, depending on your teaching context, writing a word with a finger on someone's back so that they can guess what word you've just spelled, or maybe just there on their forearm. Depending on your teaching context, this may be suitable, it may not. So again, it's really up to you to decide which ones of these are going to work best for your own students. Cognitive strategies. The one there at the top is really for students to be able to link new spellings to words that they already know. So if they already know the word enough, when they learn the word cough, then they should be able to add it to their list. And I think that's why it's really useful for students to have that kind of list that they make themselves, that they compile themselves with, common spelling patterns. And then maybe on the other side of the book, spellings or vocabulary notes to do with topics. The next one, mnemonics. Again, it's a hard word to spell. I had to check that one. So one way that students can remember how to spell people is pink eagle obeys purple little eagle. Now, you might find that this works for some students and it may not work for some others. If I'm honest, that's never really worked for me because I find it's just too much to remember. But I know that it's really worked for some of my colleagues. Like, oh, that's how I learned how to spell because, big elephants care about usually small elephants or some. So again, it worked for some people. It maybe doesn't work as well for some others. Okay, the idea about cognitive strategy is to really get our students to ask themselves, does this look right? So using true, false, right? So look at this word. Do you think it's spelled correctly? Why not? Finding the odd one out. So for example, here I've used 3 words with the same letter string or UGH, but one of them's got a different sound. So can the students identify this? Next one, so again, the idea of getting students to make their own spelling log. It doesn't have to be in a book. It could even be on a Google Doc. And it could be like a kind of classroom document that, one student updates every week and then it moves on to somebody else, to share the load. Why not? And the last one, I think it's one of the main one when it comes to cognitive strategies. It's really the idea of definitely self, but also peer correction. I wrote explain mistakes here because A, it's hard, but B, I think it's incredibly valuable. So if a student misspelled a word, just give them the chance to ask themselves, why do you think you got that one wrong? Is it because you confused it with a different word? Is it because it was a double letter? So what led you to making that one mistake? Because hopefully, one, they've been able to internalize why they got it wrong. Hopefully, it's going to help them get it right the next time. The last one, we did a session on this before, dictation. Again, huge fan. It works for a variety of different purposes, but it does help with spelling. Now, I find that if we're going to use dictation for spelling, still meaning comes first, no matter what. So I would still get the students to read the text first or to listen to the text first, even just for comprehension, so that they know what the gist is and maybe they've done a couple of scanning tasks. Then I would always give students time to go through the text for them to think what words they think they might get wrong, right? Once they've identified the words they might get wrong, I would get them to practice with that little chart I showed you earlier on, the LSCWC. So look, say, cover, write, and check. Then they'll do the dictation. And then students are going to compare their text with the original. And again, whatever words they got wrong, they're going to practice again with look, say, cover, write, and check. Right, a quick note on best practice. I think a lot of the time we think, do I really need to teach spelling? We don't really teach spelling as an English language teacher because we often make the assumption that spelling is something that's just caught. And a lot of the time we find that we don't really need to work on spelling with our students. Some students seem to count it, but for some students we need to teach it. So it's not always caught. Sometimes it needs to be taught. Is it my job to teach spelling? What next? Again, like I said earlier on, if it's not our job, whose job is it? So yes, it's for us to develop our skills, again, as teachers, to then become better able to help our students improve their spelling. Again, we mentioned this earlier on. While this statement is very reassuring, it also turns spelling into this really big, huge thing where students might just go, my teacher finds spelling hard. I don't even stand a chance. I'm just going to give up now. So again, it's not really helpful maybe in the long run. you may find that you're going to teach students with very mixed levels. Some students may have no issue with spelling whatsoever, and some students may have very significant difficulties when it comes to spelling. So how can we best make use of our stronger students to help the weaker students? And how do we make sure the stronger students are still getting something out of it? So again, that's something we can maybe talk about later together, because I'd love to know what your views are on this. So when it comes to spelling, are we going to teach one-off lessons on spelling? So, okay, guys, today it's 2 hours. Well, let's look at our OUGH words. Or is it something that we should incorporate in each and every lesson? Again, you'll tell me, what do you think works best for you? What works best for me is to integrate spelling as part of each and every lesson. So let's say if we're looking at 4 new words in a lesson, we'll look at the meaning, we'll look at the pronunciation, we'll look at the spelling. So again, I think we're better off teaching fewer words, but really teaching them in a lot more depth. That by the end of the lesson, students know what the words mean, they know how to say them, they can recognize them, they can read them, and they can write them. And for some students, that may take a fair amount of time. And again, the idea here of mixed levels is going to that one of peer learning. Can the students help one another? I think 100%. Because again, if you've got good spellers in the class, find out from them, what is it they do that makes them so good, at spelling? And you may find that your students aren't even aware of what strategy they're using. So again, it might be useful to also show the students what strategy they are already using to develop their own awareness. The last point here is, I find in my experience, a lot of teachers say to me, I just don't do spelling because I just feel it's a bit patronizing. So I'll just tell the students to use the spell check or to use a dictionary. I think it feels a bit infantilizing if we look at primary resources. A lot of the time you find, they look a bit childish. But I think as long as we teach spelling in context, I think it's still incredibly useful. And again, if our students need it, we have to do it. So I don't think it's infantilizing as long as the words are picked in context, as long as they're relevant to our students' needs. So that's us for now. And here are links to other websites, other resources. Don't forget to check the Gallery Teachers library. Loads of different resources there and access to loads of different workshops as well. Why do we need to teach spelling? Well, if we don't teach spelling, who is, right? You may find that most of your students have no issue whatsoever with spelling. And if so, happy days, brilliant. But you may have a few students that really struggle with spelling. And it's our job to help them. If we're not going to be the people to help them with their spelling, who is, right? So it is our job. We need to teach spelling, because if students keep struggling with spelling, it's going to have a knock-on effect on their English language learning experience as a whole. We find that students who've got difficulties with spelling often find it harder to develop their writing skills and often resort to a more limited range of lexis. Most importantly, poor spellers often lack confidence, and that's got a knock-on effect on their ability to really improve and develop their potential as English language learners. So bottom line is, why do we need to teach spelling? It's our job. If our students struggle with it, it's our job to help them with it. And as we'll see, there are loads of different things we can do to help our students improve their spelling, thankfully. To help our students improve their spelling, the first rule, I think, is this one: don't panic, right? You may be thinking, I have to help students with their spelling, but I'm not the most confident speller myself, right? First thing is, don't panic. There are loads of different things that we can do to help our students improve their spelling. We can use a range of strategies, ranging from visual strategies, using colors to highlight the hard spots in words. We can use auditory strategies, spelling aloud. We can use kinesthetic strategies, getting our students to write words up in the air or on their desk. We can use cognitive strategies, using error correction, getting our students to really stop and think why they spelled a word wrong. Also, I think spelling is a great opportunity for us to seek more support and to look at further opportunities for CPD. We'll have a look at different strategies we can use to help our students improve their spelling. And then we'll also have a look at different books and articles that are really, really useful and that will stand you in good stead. So remember, just don't panic.